It was another day in what had become a monotonous routine. I sat at the kitchen table, absently swirling a spoon in my half-drunk cup of coffee. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying me. My baby, barely 6 months old, slept soundly in the next room. I could hear the gentle rise and fall of his breathing on the baby monitor. He was my only anchor, my tiny beacon of light in a world that had grown increasingly dark. David, my husband, was upstairs packing for a trip to visit his parents, a trip I had no desire to take. The thought of being stuck in a car with him for hours, pretending we were a happy family, filled me with dread. Things between us had been tense for months. His dismissive attitude, his temper, and his complete lack of empathy had turned our marriage into a battlefield where I felt outnumbered and unarmed. I glanced at the calendar on the wall, the date circled in red, family visit. My stomach churned at the sight. I wanted to call it off, to tell David I wasn't feeling well, but I knew how he'd react. He'd accuse me of being selfish, of trying to ruin his plans. Just go along with it, I whispered to myself, though my heart screamed in protest. Lisa, are you packed yet? David's voice thundered down the stairs, sharp and impatient. I took a deep breath before answering. I'm not sure I should go, David. I'm feeling a bit off today. There was a pause before his footsteps pounded down the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of frustration. You're always feeling off. You'll be fine. Just rest in the car if you're tired. I tried to muster a response, but his dismissive tone cut me off before I could even start. He strode past me, grabbed my half-packed bag from the corner, and shoved it toward me. Come on, we're already running late. Reluctantly, I followed him to the car. As I settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the gnawing unease in my chest. Something about today felt wrong. We were barely out of the driveway when it happened. A sharp, unmistakable gush of warmth spread down my legs. For a moment, I was frozen, trying to process what was happening. Then it hit me, my water had broken. David, I gasped, my water just broke. We need to go to the hospital, now. He slammed on the brakes, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Are you serious? Now? Yes, now, I snapped, panic rising in my voice. The baby's coming. Instead of springing into action, David muttered something under his breath, grabbed a towel from the back seat, and threw it at me. Clean it up, he said, his voice flat. Clean it up? I echoed in disbelief. David, this is serious, we have to go. He cut me off, throwing open his door and walking around to mine. Before I could comprehend what was happening, he yanked the passenger door open and barked. Get out. What? My voice cracked. Get out of the car, he yelled. You're going to ruin the seats. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled out of the car, clutching my belly. How could you do this? I'm your wife, and I'm having your child. He glared at me, his face twisted in annoyance. This isn't my fault. Lisa, you should have planned this better. Call an ambulance or something. And with that, he got back into the car, slammed the door, and drove away, leaving me alone on the side of the road. I stood there, stunned and trembling, watching the taillights disappear down the road. My phone felt like a lifeline in my pocket as I dialed for an ambulance, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. Before the operator could answer, a voice called out behind me. Lisa, are you okay? I turned to see Sarah, my neighbor, rushing toward me. She'd always been kind, but we'd never been particularly close. Yet in that moment, she looked like an angel sent to save me. My water broke. I managed to choke out between sobs. David, he left me here. Her face darkened with shock and fury, but her voice remained calm. We need to get you to the hospital. Come on. She helped me into her car, her movements careful but decisive. As she drove, she held my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. You're going to be okay, she said softly. I promise. When we arrived at the hospital, Sarah didn't leave my side. She stayed with me through the paperwork, through the hurried footsteps of nurses, and even as I was wheeled into a room, her presence was a steady comfort, like a lighthouse guiding me through the storm. My parents arrived not long after, their faces etched with worry. Sarah pulled them aside to explain what had happened, her voice low but firm. I watched from my hospital bed, my heart swelling with gratitude. This woman, who owed me nothing, had done more for me in a single day than David had in months. As the labor pains intensified, I made a silent vow. David would pay for what he'd done, not out of spite, but to protect my baby and myself. I wouldn't let him drag us down any longer. When I finally heard my baby's cries, relief and joy washed over me. I held him close, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and felt a surge of love stronger than anything I'd ever known. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and I was determined to write it on my own terms. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft whimpers of my newborn nestled in my arms. The exhaustion from labor weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of David, his callousness, his abandonment, and the cold, heartless way he had left me on the side of the road. I stared at the baby, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling as he drifted in and out of sleep. A deep sadness filled my chest, but there was also something else, resolve. He deserved better than the chaos David would bring into our lives, and so did I. The door creaked open, and Sarah peeked her head in, carrying a cup of tea. "How's my favorite little family?" she whispered, smiling warmly. I managed a weak smile. "We're okay, thanks to you." She set the tea down and pulled up a chair beside me. "Lisa, I've been thinking, you can't go back to him, not after this." I looked away, her words cutting too close to the truth. "I don't know where to start, Sarah, I don't even have a plan." "Start by knowing your worth," she said firmly. "You're stronger than you think." Later that afternoon, as I rested with the baby, the sound of raised voices outside my hospital room jolted me awake. My heart sank. I recognized David's voice. He barged in moments later, his expression unreadable. "Lisa," he began, his eyes darting between me and the baby, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I said, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "I think you said everything you needed to when you left me on the side of the road." David flinched, but quickly regained his composure. I panicked. "Okay, I made a mistake, but I'm here now, let's just move past it." I stared at him in disbelief. "Move past it? David, you abandoned me during labor. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? What if something had happened to me or the baby?" He sighed, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Lisa, you're blowing this out of proportion. I came to see my son, didn't I? Doesn't that count for something?" His son, not our son. The words stung, but they also clarified something for me. David didn't see us as a family, he saw us as obligations, burdens to be managed. I realized then that I couldn't stay in this marriage, not for another day. "You need to leave," I said firmly, my voice trembling but resolute. "What?" He blinked, caught off guard. "You're kicking me out of the hospital?" "Yes," I said, my grip tightening around my baby. "I don't want you here." For a moment, I thought he might argue, but he simply shrugged. "Fine, have it your way." As he stormed out, I felt a wave of relief mixed with a lingering sense of fear. I had stood up to him, but I knew this was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and overwhelming exhaustion. My parents stayed with me at the hospital, their quiet support a balm to my frayed nerves. They hadn't said much about David, but I could see the concern in their eyes. On the day of my discharge, my father pulled me aside. "Lisa," he said gently, "we're proud of you for standing up to David, but what's your plan now?" I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. "I'm going to file for separation," I said finally. "I can't go back to him, not after what he did." My father nodded, his expression both relieved and worried. "You know we're here for you, right? Whatever you need." Their support gave me strength, but I knew this was a battle I'd have to fight on my own. Returning to the house I had shared with David was out of the question. Instead, I moved in with my parents temporarily, setting up a nursery in the room I had grown up in. As I settled into this new phase of life, I started reaching out to lawyers and support groups. It was terrifying, but it was also empowering. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The weeks that followed were both challenging and rewarding. Every day was a balancing act, caring for my baby, managing my emotions, and navigating the legalities of separating from David. But amidst the chaos, there were moments of pure joy, like the first time my baby smiled at me, or the way he curled into my arms when he was sleepy. Sarah visited often, bringing meals and words of encouragement. "You're doing great," she said one afternoon as she rocked the baby to sleep. "I hope you know that." "I don't feel great," I admitted. "Some days, I don't even feel like myself." "That's normal," she said, "but you're stronger than you think. You've already come so far." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. Just when I thought I was finding my footing, David reappeared, this time with demands. He showed up at my parents' house one evening, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "You can't just take my son away from me," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I have rights." "No one's stopping you from being a father," I said, keeping my voice calm, "but you don't get to control me anymore." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're better off without me? You're nothing without me, Lisa." The words stung, but they didn't break me. "You're wrong," I said quietly. "I'm everything without you." I shut the door in his face, my hands trembling. I knew this wasn't the end of his threats, but I also knew I wasn't the same scared, dependent woman he had once controlled. That night, as I held my baby close, I made a promise to him and to myself. I would fight for our future, no matter how difficult it was. I wouldn't let David's anger or manipulation dictate our lives. I began documenting everything, every interaction with David, every threat he made. My lawyer had advised me to keep detailed records, and I was determined to be prepared for whatever came next. At the same time, I leaned on the people who cared about me. My parents, Sarah, and the support group I had joined became my lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this battle. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild. Each small victory, a peaceful day, a milestone with the baby, was a step forward, and with every step, I felt my confidence grow. Life with my baby, whom I'd named Oliver, was a mix of exhaustion and wonder. Every coup, every tiny milestone, felt like a victory, a reminder of the life I was building for us. My days were consumed by caring for him, attending parenting classes, and working with my lawyer to navigate the separation. I was trying to create a semblance of normalcy, but David's shadow loomed large. He began calling incessantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic pleas to angry outbursts. I ignored most of them, forwarding anything threatening to my lawyer. One morning, as I sat in the living room feeding Oliver, my phone buzzed with another message from David. This one was different. "Lisa, I'm done playing nice. If you don't let me see my son, I'll make your life hell. You've been warned." The words sent a shiver down my spine. My lawyer assured me I was doing everything right, but David's unpredictability was a constant source of anxiety. One afternoon, during my first tentative visit back to the office, David showed up unannounced. He was waiting by the building entrance, his face twisted with frustration. "David, you can't be here," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fear bubbling in my chest. "You're avoiding me," he accused. "You won't take my calls, and now you're keeping me from my son." "I'm not avoiding you," I said, stepping back as he moved closer. "I'm protecting Oliver. You abandoned us, David. You can't just show up and demand access." His voice rose, drawing the attention of a few coworkers. "He's my son too, Lisa. You don't get to make all the decisions." "Then take it to court," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "But stop harassing me." Before he could respond, security arrived, escorting him off the premises. The humiliation on his face was evident, but I didn't feel triumphant. If anything, I felt more trapped than ever. After the incident at work, my lawyer advised me to file for a restraining order. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Despite everything, part of me wanted to believe David could change, that he could be a better father than he had been a husband. But the threats, the unpredictable behavior, and the scene at my workplace left me with little choice. I had to prioritize Oliver's safety and my own. The court hearing was a nerve-wracking experience. David showed up with his lawyer, looking polished and composed, a stark contrast to the volatile man I knew. He painted himself as a devoted father, a man who had made mistakes but deserved a chance to be in his son's life. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out the facts: the abandonment during labor, the threats, the harassment. My lawyer presented the voicemails and documented incidents, painting a clear picture of David's behavior. The judge granted the restraining order, restricting David's contact with me and allowing supervised visits with Oliver. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. With the restraining order in place, a sense of relief settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Oliver and I fell into a new rhythm, surrounded by love and support from my family and friends. One evening, Sarah invited me to a small gathering at her house. It was a chance to unwind, to remember that I was more than just a mother navigating a messy separation. Among the guests was Daniel, a mutual friend of Sarah's. He was kind, with an easy smile and a warmth that felt disarming. We struck up a conversation, sharing stories about work and life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made my chest feel lighter. As the night went on, I found myself drawn to him. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a simple connection that felt refreshing. The peace didn't last long. A week after the gathering at Sarah's, I received a letter from David's lawyer. He was contesting the custody arrangements, seeking joint custody of Oliver. The thought of sharing parenting responsibilities with David was unbearable. "He's trying to get back at me," I told my lawyer during a tense meeting. "This isn't about Oliver, it's about control." "I believe you," she said, "but we need to focus on the evidence. If we can prove that joint custody isn't in Oliver's best interest, the court will side with you." The thought of another legal battle was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't back down. Oliver deserved stability, not the chaos David would bring into his life. The weeks leading up to the custody hearing were some of the hardest I'd faced. David's legal team dug into every aspect of my life, trying to paint me as an unfit mother. They questioned my decision to live with my parents, my ability to balance work and motherhood, even my brief interaction with Daniel. Through it all, I held on to the support of the people around me, my parents, Sarah, and even Daniel, who had become a steady presence in my life, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. The hearing was tense and emotional. Both sides presented their arguments, but in the end, the court ruled in my favor. David was granted limited visitation, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. After the hearing, I sat in the car with my lawyer, tears streaming down my face. They were a mix of relief, exhaustion, and gratitude. The fight wasn't over, there would always be challenges, but I had proven to myself that I could stand up for Oliver and for me. When I got home that evening, I found Daniel waiting on the porch. He didn't say much, just pulled me into a hug that felt like home. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said softly. "Oliver's lucky to have you." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The days following the custody ruling brought a rare stillness to my life. The weight of the legal battle lifted, leaving space for me to reflect on everything that had transpired. I spent hours with Oliver, marveling at the tiny miracles of his growth, his first tooth, the way he reached for me when he needed comfort, the small giggles that seemed to erase the darkest days. He was my reason for everything, my light in every storm. David's supervised visits began soon after. I felt a pang of anxiety each time I handed Oliver over to the court-appointed monitor, but the arrangement offered me a sense of control. I knew Oliver would be safe, and that was enough. One evening, as I rocked Oliver to sleep, I thought about the person I had been before all this, a young woman brimming with dreams, but uncertain of her strength. Life had tested me in ways I never expected, but I'd emerged stronger, more sure of who I was and what I deserved. My friendship with Daniel continued to blossom. He wasn't just a source of support, he became someone I looked forward to seeing, someone who reminded me that joy still existed, even in the aftermath of chaos. One Saturday, he invited me and Oliver to a park. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made the world feel brighter. Daniel brought a blanket and a basket of snacks, and we spent hours under the shade of a tree, talking and laughing while Oliver napped in my arms. "You've been through so much," Daniel said, his voice gentle, "but you're still standing. That's incredible." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "Oliver needed me." He smiled, his gaze warm. "And you've been there for him every step of the way. But you deserve happiness too, Lisa." His words stayed with me long after we left the park. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival, a future that included love and laughter. David's visits were uneventful at first, but over time, he began to change. He started sending small gifts for Oliver, leaving notes apologizing for his past behavior. I remained wary, but I couldn't ignore the effort he was making. One afternoon, after a particularly peaceful visit, David asked to speak with me. "I know I've been a terrible husband and father," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to be better for Oliver." His words stirred a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that he could change, but another part of me remembered the pain he'd caused, the sleepless nights, and the fear. "I appreciate the effort you're making," I said carefully, "but trust takes time. If you're serious about being there for Oliver, prove it with your actions." It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a step toward understanding, a fragile bridge between the past and the future. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. David continued his supervised visits, slowly earning the court's trust, while our relationship remained distant. We found a way to co-parent with civility. Meanwhile, my bond with Daniel deepened. He wasn't just a friend anymore, he was someone I could lean on, someone who made me feel safe. One evening, after putting Oliver to bed, Daniel stayed for dinner. As we sat on the couch, talking about everything and nothing, he reached for my hand. "Lisa," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I know you've been through so much. I don't want to rush anything, but I care about you, I care about Oliver, and I want to be here for both of you, if you'll let me." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. "I'd like that," I whispered. It wasn't a grand declaration or a sweeping romance, it was quiet and real, built on trust and understanding. On Oliver's first birthday, I threw a small party at my parents' house. It was a celebration of not just his life, but everything we'd overcome together. Friends and family gathered in the backyard, showering Oliver with love and laughter. David showed up briefly, bringing a small, thoughtful gift for Oliver, a handmade photo album filled with pictures of their visits. He stayed just long enough to share a moment with his son before quietly leaving, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement as he went. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was enough. David was trying, and that mattered. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood in the quiet house, holding Oliver as he drifted off to sleep. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the challenges, the unexpected moments of grace. I wasn't the same person I'd been a year ago. I was stronger, more resilient, and more certain of my worth. Life hadn't unfolded the way I'd imagined, but in its messiness and beauty, it had given me everything I needed. As I put Oliver in his crib and turned off the light, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could handle it. I had my son, my family, and the beginnings of a new love. And for the first time, I felt truly free.